Some tend to say that most popular modern fragrances all kind of smell the same. Is this true? What do I think? Hello, welcome back to Seldomly Often. I'm Daniel. Today we're talking fragrances, and this is the first impression comparison between the Harmonist Hypnotizing Fire and Parfums de Marly Haltane. In this video series, I compare and give my first impressions on two fragrances, usually in sample form, that I chose to cover a specific topic. This is not a fragrance battle. We're not here to define which of the two fragrances is better. We're just here to talk about our experience and to open the conversation. Yes, you've heard me right. Today I'm going to be comparing two relatively popular fragrances, both quite modern in approach. Actually, one is much more popular than the other. Parfums de Marly Haltane is actually one of the most popular Parfums de Marly fragrances out there. Hypnotizing Fire by the brand of the Harmonist is a little bit less known compared to the PDM, but it's been getting a little bit more traction recently, and I don't really know where it stands today. It might be one of those hay fires that's very bright and very intense, but just ultimately fizzles out super quick. I'm not really sure, but some of you guys have been requesting me to review Hypnotizing Fire, so here we are. Why did I pair these two together? I'm not really sure, to be honest. I remember pairing these two together on a brief. I have an Excel sheet where I put in all my samples and I try to piece them together according to something. And when today I went back to look at the notes for these to sort of prepare for this video, again, I'm not here to reference notes, but I just wanted to get a general idea of what I could be expecting. But anyway, I just noticed that these fragrances have basically nothing in common. They only have one note in common, and that is the praline note. So in a way, I am kind of expecting them to smell different. But on the other hand, I'm also expecting them to smell kind of similar. And when I say similar, what I mean is I'm kind of expecting these two things to feel the same sort of vibe. Yes, Hypnotizing Fire might be a little bit more sweet in the dry down, and Haltane might be a little bit more masculine. But given the fact that they're two modern fragrances that came out relatively close to each other from two modern hyped niche houses or pseudo niche, I'm kind of expecting them to sort of have the same look and feel, if you get me. And overall, they might be actually comparable, or even more comparable than I think they are. But this video is actually more about modern fragrances in general and what they smell like and if they're good for me. Because lately I've been getting my nose out of my comfort zone on some stuff that is not necessarily under my radar. And I'm kind of realizing that a lot of these modern fragrances, maybe it's something in there that's in common, but they're not really to my taste, and actually I have trouble smelling a lot of them. It might be some sort of synthetic compound like Isoe Super or some sort of ambroxan that really adds a lot of volume, because I do perceive that volume. And I even mentioned this in some of my latest videos where I refer to this as like empty volume smelling. I'm not really sure what it is, maybe Isoe Super, maybe ambroxan, maybe something along those lines. I've also experienced this feeling on one of my latest purchases. We're talking about Montabaco Intensivo by Ormond Jane. Again, there, the overall freshness kind of works well with this very voluminous type of airiness. But when that empty volume type of smell is paired with darker notes, that is especially jarring to me. And I experienced that with Side Effect by Initio, which I covered in a first impression video. I can't remember what else, but oh, it was maybe Oud for Greatness. But also, again, more famously, Baccarat Rouge 540. I can barely smell the thing. And despite the majority of people saying that it's an uber projecting beast, I can barely pick it up on my nose. So maybe modern fragrances are not my thing. Maybe I'm anosmic to some sort of compound. It's okay. And I'm trying to see if also these two relatively popular fragrances follow the same thing, and if maybe modern fragrances that are built around these compounds are just not for me. It's an interesting experience. I'm still kind of like feeling around outside of my comfort zone. I'm here to learn. I have nothing against these houses. I will be as objective and as unbiased as possible. I really don't care either way. I have nothing to gain. Before we start, let me just remind you how all this goes. I'll be spraying these two directly on skin, left and right arm. I'll be giving my impressions on the very first opening, maybe talking a little bit about the experiences that I have with the houses, and then I'll take a break. I'll come back after a couple hours, maybe 3 hours sometimes, and I'll talk about the dry down, my impressions of the dry down, my forecasted longevity, my forecasted versatility in use cases, and overall value for money. So sit tight and let's get started. I'll be spraying Hypnotizing Fire on my left arm and Haltane on my right arm. Let's start off with Hypnotizing Fire. As you can tell, this is a pretty big decant. It says it's 10 ml. I'm not really sure how much is left in here, and I'm not really sure who gave it to me. It's probably my friend Not, the usual. But yeah, I've been sitting on this decant for a very long time. It's been at least 6 months. I never sprayed this on yet. I have zero experience with this fragrance. When I first got this, I think it was the start of summer, and I wasn't really in the mood to spray something that was called Hypnotizing Fire. And as far as I could tell by a brief research, this was supposed to be some sort of a light gourmand, very enveloping, very warm, very wintry type of fragrance. So yeah, I wasn't really in the mood for this at the time. And I kind of forgot about this, and I pulled it out recently when I actually got a decant of Haltane, because some of you may know that I mentioned it in a video, or maybe in a comment, that I was supposed to get a bottle of Haltane. That didn't really pan out. So I eventually got a decant because I really wanted to give my first impressions to you. And while going through the decants to find something to pair with Haltane, I found Hypnotizing Fire again, and for whatever reason, I thought it was a good choice. Again, today, I'm a little bit puzzled. I don't know the reasoning behind this, but nonetheless, we're gonna go through with this. So as I mentioned, again, Hypnotizing Fire on my left arm. This seems to be a pretty decent atomizer. I say we go 3 sprays and take it from there. Very diffusive. All right, first thing to note is that I can already smell this in the air. It's very, very strong, and I'm not even waving my arm around, so there's that. Second of all, I'm not really familiar with the house of the Harmonist whatsoever. I know that their fragrances they seem cool. They have a cool bottle design. They seem interesting. I kind of like the names. They're inspiring in a way. But ultimately, I really haven't dug deeper into the house because these are not readily available around me. So I kind of left it at that. What I do know is that most bottles come in 50 mLs, and they're actually quite pricey. I think that on the official US website, it's 310 bucks for 50 mLs. And when I logged in from where I am, it goes for 280 francs for 50 mLs. So pricey stuff, definitely upper end of the realm. The other thing that I quickly noticed is that popping the name of the fragrance into YouTube, I immediately got a lot of results from the usual faces that tend to get free bottles. So I'm not really sure if this is the case for this fragrance. I'm again unbiased. I don't really want to point fingers prematurely. I don't know what's going on, but I really hope that it's not another one of those mind games type of situations where the fragrances are quite mediocre, especially compared to the price that they're asking for. Okay, now that we set that intro aside, it's been long enough. Let's get sniffing. This is very, very different from what I was expecting. It's actually surprisingly different. I'm very positively surprised in a way. I was expecting something a lot more faint and a lot more injected with that sort of maybe ambroxan, iso soup or whatever, but it's actually very easy to detect. It's actually way more powdery than I was expecting, and powdery is not something that you usually find in modern fragrances. I think that the majority of the young audience tends to associate powdery notes with like a little bit more of a mature scent profile. This smells very clean, very powdery. There's a lot of rose in here, definitely. And again, I'm not necessarily remembering the notes, but I seem to remember there's rose in there. Surprisingly enough, the very first thing that came to mind is actually Portrait of a Lady by Frédéric Malle. And don't hate me for this because I'm not trying to compare the two things, but that's the first image that I got in my mind. Obviously, Portrait of a Lady is a lot more rosy, it's a lot more deep, it's a little bit more photorealistic. This is has something in here which is kind of masking the whole scent profile. I'm not really sure what it is. It smells very familiar, but I can't pinpoint it. Maybe it's some sort of a woody note, maybe cedar note, maybe some sort of a synthetic oud note that's found in something like MFK Oud Silk Mood. It has a little bit of a dry sawdust type of feeling. That's, again, maybe it's like over everything. It also kind of reminds me, for whatever reason, of Arzo by Parfums de Marly Haltane. So again, maybe there is that sawdust, that cedar, that very resinous type of wood. Again, I can't remember what's in here now because I'm blanking out given the smell, because it's not matching my expectations whatsoever. But yes, I have to say that the majority of what I'm getting is this powdery rose, very dry, very clean feeling, with this either base or this blanket of cedar or sawdust that is covering the whole scent profile. It's very pleasant, but there's something in here that really reminds me of something that I can't really pinpoint, that's giving this this fragrance a very modern type of feel. And again, it might be one of those compounds that I'm actually familiar with, maybe from other fragrances, but it also might be just some clever use of ingredients. And maybe it's the praline note, maybe it's some sort of vanilla, but it has a very mass appealing, very beautiful type of scent profile. But at the same time, again, it does remind me a little bit of Portrait of a Lady, just a tiny bit. So it has this elevated type of matureness that's maybe given by the florals, maybe the woods, maybe a particular style of rose. Again, it's very dry, very dusty, very powdery. I think it smells great. It smells very, very good. Actually, I know what it smells like. The woody component smells like the wood component in Oud for Greatness. It has the same sort of a balsamic, resinous, very tree-like woody component. And I actually praised Oud for Greatness for that aspect. Now, Oud for Greatness was actually flooded by, again, synthetics. I'm not really sure what it is. I'm not an expert. Maybe Isoy Super, maybe Ambroxan, maybe Hedione or something like that. But this whole thing was kind of flooding and overpowering this woody aspect. Here, it's a lot more detectable. It smells, you know what it might be? It might be like some sort of amber wood. And again, I'm not an expert. I'm just kind of like reminded by something. It reminds me almost of Tom Ford's Bois Marocain. It's a really nice woody note. I actually really like it. It smells not too synthetic. It smells relatively realistic, or rather, it reminds me of sawdust. It reminds me of smelling like a freshly cut plank of wood. So there's that. So I'm not complaining. It smells good. I like it. And paired with this rose, I think it's a really interesting combination. For whatever reason, I was expecting something a lot more gourmand, a lot more youthful and vanilla-y, but I'm actually positively surprised. My expectations might have been contaminated by the name. I found the Hypnotizing Fire name pretty interesting. And in my head, again, it was very warm, very enveloping, maybe more spicy. But the name Hypnotizing Fire doesn't really match what I'm smelling. Maybe it's a very prominent rose note that is not jiving with the name. Overall, I actually quite like this. I'm very, very surprised. I was expecting not to like this at all. I was kind of expecting this to turn out as another one of those side effect sort of situations where I would find the main profile very, very simplistic and I could barely smell the rest of it. So I'm actually very positively surprised, despite this smelling very, very modern in this kind of a nondescript or non-describable type of way. Okay, let's give Hypnotizing Fire a rest. Let's move on to Haltane. This video is already long as is, so we need to speed it up here. I think we did 3 sprays of the Hypnotizing Fire. Let's go with 3 sprays of this. This sprayer is way more potent, and I objectively doused my arm way more, but we'll take it as it is. Wow, this is super powerful. I'm actually engulfed in this woody, balsamic, very sawdust of a feeling. The woody component in Haltane, I can already tell, it's quite similar to the one in the Harmonist. So there might be something to this comparison. They might be both using the same sort of amberwood compound or component. They smell remarkably similar in that aspect. Obviously, Haltane does not smell like roses. I don't think there's rose in here whatsoever. It smells a lot drier, it smells a lot more masculine in a way. But we'll get to the comparison in a bit. I have to let this thing aerate and dry down. In the meantime, let me tell you about my experience with Parfums de Marly. I have to admit that it's not that extensive. I owned, I think, 3 bottles, and I've sampled quite a bit more. The 3 bottles I owned were in the early days of my fragrance journey. And yeah, that's what I was presented with. I trusted the reviews and I got those. So I owned Herod, I owned Greenlee, and I owned Percival. Again, I relatively quickly grew out of that scent profile. I found them very good, but ultimately a little bit boring on a day-to-day basis. To be completely fair, my fragrance point of view has changed dramatically throughout the years. Back then, I was searching for stuff to wear on a daily basis. I was highly valuing the utility aspect of fragrances, which I don't do whatsoever anymore. I do value now intent and artistic execution. So yes, completely different. I was just happy to have Parfums de Marly. They smelled good. They felt exclusive relatively to all the other designers, and they felt a little bit more deep and rich. I have never smelled Haltane. I have zero experience with it. I never looked into getting a bottle, well, until recently for you guys. I don't know, I think I was just out of the PDM space when I discovered that Haltane was even a thing. And later down the road, I actually got to understand that Haltane is very, very similar to Oud for Greatness because they are sister companies. I'm not really sure which one has been developed before. I'm not really sure if they recycle the formula. I don't really care about those things. All I care about is if I like the scent profile or not. And again, it just so happens that most initial fragrances are not to my liking because of that mega volume boosting compound. So Parfums de Marly seems a little bit better in that regard. Maybe they're using something different that is a little bit more compatible with my nose. But here we are nonetheless. Let's get my nose on Haltane. First thing that I can definitely say is that this to me is a lot more detectable, a lot more potent, a lot more present than Oud for Greatness. It might be due to those, again, those artificial compounds that either brand uses, but this is a lot more detectable. It's a lot easier to smell and to take in. At the same time though, Haltane is a lot more flat, a lot smoother, a lot less edgy and less characterful. Oud for Greatness had a lot of that balsamic woodiness that felt cool. I really like that aspect. It felt more realistic. This feels like the dry down for Oud for Greatness. It feels like it's been tamed down and there's something over it to just keep it down and to make it more likable. Again, I do feel that Oud for Greatness is a fairly likable scent per se. I might be biased because I like really heavy, weird stuff, but overall, I don't find that challenging whatsoever. And this is just the initial, but heavily sanded down, just to remain in that woody concept idea. It's good, but it's not interesting to me. And again, the woody ambers in here are very, very similar to the ones in Hypnotizing Fire, because again, it's super apparent that I'm covered in this woody amber sort of feeling. But here the Harmonist really managed to give this scent a lot more interestingness. It's not super varied, it's pretty much all in the same tonal range, but the rose notes, those sweet vanilla notes or ambery notes really stick out, and it's really easy to pinpoint them and picture them. And in the PDM, yes, it's a lot more masculine, it's a lot more dry, but I'm not really getting much other than this woody amber thing. There might be a little bit more greenness in here, maybe an oily green like a rosemary, like a thyme, some sort of a very light, very subdued green aromatic note that gives it a tiny bit of masculine edge. But overall, this is not a fresh fragrance whatsoever. This is it's a very flat, mid-tone centric fragrance, as is the Harmonist. They're both relatively non-impressive tone range wise. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just a statement. They completely lack any sort of top zing or any sort of deep rumble. And this makes them very, very wearable, probably in a variety of seasons and situations, because again, very deep rumbling fragrances are not really compatible or suitable to summer. And actually the lack of zinginess on top is probably by design, because I think that these scents are designed to be very smooth, with no harshness, with no edginess, with no sharpness. And they do succeed in that. Now, you might be especially sensitive to amber woods, or not. Some people are. I feel that reviewers like Personalized completely despise amber woods. Also, Ramsey completely shuts down a fragrance if it's amber woods heavy. I'm not that opposed to them. I do like it. I do like the relatively realistic type of sawdust, cedar type of thing. So I don't mind that at all. But overall, yes, they are a little bit flat. They are a little bit very pedestrian in a way. And again, it's not pointing fingers at the fragrance. It's not blasting the fragrance. It's not insulting them. They are designed for a specific type of audience, and they succeed in that design. Hypnotizing Fire definitely became a lot smoother since I sprayed it. The very detectable rose is much more subdued, and there's a newfound vanilla that really emerged from the background that is sort of enveloping the whole thing. I wasn't really smelling this from the start because maybe the alcohol evaporation needed to occur for this to appear, but overall now it's definitely more vanilla centric. It's vanilla, woody with a touch of rose. On the other side, Haltane is pretty much the same as I first sprayed it. Even the initial alcohol evaporation didn't really seem to have any impact on the scent profile. All I'm getting is this very beautiful, woody, amber wood with this sort of sawdust type of feeling. There's a little bit of green in there, but it's in the background. It's definitely not apparent. This is a very smooth, very easy to wear, woody type of fragrance. All right, I'm a little bit fatigued and this video is already long as it is. So I'm gonna take a little bit of a break, maybe 2 to 3 hours, and come back and talk about the dry down and wrap it up. Okay, we're back. It's been a little bit less than 2 hours, to be completely honest. I was getting bored of these two fragrances. I feel that they reached the dry down very, very soon, or if not, they're super, super stable in their wear experience. So no surprises there, no massive transition, no narration, no storytelling whatsoever. These two fragrances are mainly designed to be smell good type of fragrances, which is totally fine, but it's just that. So first and foremost, the Harmonist became very smooth, super vanilla centric, very vanilla ambery centric. There's still a little bit of that sawdust type of woodiness, but it pretty much mostly evaporated. And now it sort of resembles that very generic ambery smooth type of dry down that you find in many, many fragrances from the likes of Sergio, from designers, from other fragrances that I've smelled. It's a very common, very predictable, very compliant and pedestrian type of dry down. There's really nothing surprising here. It does smell good. It's still very, very perceivable. I think that the longevity of this will be pretty good, well within the 8 hours type of range. The vanilla ambery aspect has a tiny bit of balsamicness, which is probably a residual from the woody component. The rose is completely gone. It was mainly in the first 15 to 20 minutes of the fragrance, then it just sunk into this amber thing. Now the fragrance is in a state of much more compatibility with my initial expectations. Also, given the name Hypnotizing Fire, this is kind of the thing that I was expecting. A very nondescript, very generic type of a light gourmand, ambery, vanilla type of thing. And it's good, it's likable, it's mass appealing. You could probably easily pull this off. Maybe just not in the hotter months, given how sweet it is and how much vanilla it carries. But yeah, it's very, very likable, completely mass appealing, no offense whatsoever. You can probably wear this in every situation. This is designed to be some sort of a signature scent. You can wear it casually to elegant, you can wear it day to night. It's super easy to wear in every kind of situation and around any kind of person. And the compatibility aspect is probably due to how common this sort of dry down is. Even something like Grand Soir, which is a fragrance that I highly regard, in its deepest dry down would be very, very difficult to distinguish from something like this. Again, really nice, really simple. If you wear fragrances with a more utilitarian approach, Hypnotizing Fire might be the thing for you. The main characteristics of this are definitely the rose opening, the very powdery, very mature, very dry rose. But again, that rose basically completely gets swallowed whole by the ambery vanilla thing after about 15 to 20 minutes. So the opening is beautiful, and I actually like the opening a lot more than the dry down because it kind of reminded me of something like Portrait of a Lady. It had that same sort of vibe. But overall, the way this thing dries down, I feel that it's fairly uneventful. It really depends on what you like. If you like the opening and you want it to stay, do not get this. If you want a little bit more of a interesting opening, but then you want a more predictable, simple dry down, this might be your thing. Unfortunately, this is very, very expensive. And just to recap, this is about 300 bucks for 50 ml. So I cannot recommend this as a general buy because again, it's so simple, it's so common. You can probably find the same sort of DNA in a lot of clones. Because again, it's so easy to replicate. Because it's so easy and actually so cheap to make a gourmand that smells remarkably similar to this. And there's nothing in here that really stands out as a feature that would justify the 300 bucks price tag. I'm not really sure. If you like the brand, if you like the bottle design that has a whole different appeal, that's your thing. It's very, very subjective. I'm all for that because I do like some bottles, I do like some brands, and I will be splurging for those brands, even though scent profile is relatively common. But scent profile alone, utility alone, this is not worth 300 bucks. On the other side, we have Haltane. It's a lot more difficult for me to be definitive about my recommendation for Haltane because it's a lot more interesting in my opinion, because it doesn't really smell like anything else. It does smell like Oud for Greatness, kind of. I feel that the deep dry down would be relatively similar, but at the same time, again, it's a fairly unique type of scent profile. I really haven't come across anything that smells exactly like this. Yes, I have some other fragrances that are objectively better. I feel that Arso kind of covers the same idea and concept, but it's a little bit more edgy and it's definitely deeper and richer. Then we have stuff like Tom Ford's Bois Marocain, which is also very, very woody, but that is also different because it has a little bit more of a resonance approach that might be seen as more mature and more off-putting. Again, there's nothing exactly like this. It's very stable, it's very, very predictable. The dry down basically smells exactly like the opening, except for the fact that a lot of the amber woodiness, a lot of that synthetic type of volume significantly toned down, and now we have a little bit more of a powdery type of wear experience. This came across as fairly oily in the start, and that oiliness was also aided by those greens, the rosemary or the thyme or whatever that was. Now the scent feels much more dry, it feels much more clean. In a way, it feels more elegant. It never was unelegant. This is a fairly classy scent. It's fairly masculine. Again, it smells like wood. It smells like high quality wood in a way, almost to a fake degree. Because again, that woody amber thing there has a little bit of a fake undertone, and genuine stuff might feel a little bit more sharp and a little bit more pungent and off-putting. So this is like a more refined type of wood, and refined, I mean like chemically refined wood. It's not bad at all. I actually like the scent profile. To me and my personality, Haltane is a little bit too boring. It doesn't really evolve. It's very, very linear. It doesn't really give me any images. It's just accompanies you throughout the day without too much friction. And that's absolutely fine because it's been designed like that. This is first and foremost a smell good type of fragrance, and it's fine. It has a very utilitarian type of approach. I like it. It's long lasting. The forecast longevity for this is easily 8 hours. Plus, I don't see this going anywhere. It still projects a ton. It's still very, very present in the air. It's just kind of boring to me. When it comes to the pricing of Haltane, I feel like this is a little bit more justified compared to the Harmonist for two reasons. One, because it's much, much easier to find at discounters at a reduced rate. Second of all, because the scent profile, it doesn't fall into that usual ambery vanilla type of thing, which is so insanely common. This is a little bit more unique. It kind of smells like itself. It smells like Oud for Greatness to a degree. So if you want this scent profile, you have to either get one of these two or get a specific clone to this. So again, when it comes to price, I think that if you want to support Parfums de Marly, if you like the brand, if you like the bottles, if you like the hype, whatever suits you, it's fine. This is a lot more easy to digest compared to the other one. I cannot speak for the Harmonist as a brand because I've not sampled any other of their options. They might have some really good edgy things in there, which I'm not aware of. And Hypnotizing Fire here might be just the most popular kid on the block just because of the likable scent profile. So I can't comment on that. But the price for Hypnotizing Fire is just way too high. You can get remarkably similarly smelling things for a fraction of the price. And I'm not really sure if these are easy to find at discounters. I don't know anything about the distribution of these. All I know is that in Europe and in Switzerland specifically, they're almost impossible to find. So I guess there's that. Overall gatherings and final thoughts that came from this experiment are the following. First of all, I'm not adverse to modern fragrances per se. Not all modern fragrances have these really synthetic compounds that I can't smell. Yes, there is a trend, there is a commonality, but there are definitely some contemporary options out there that use modern ingredients to a very fun, edgy degree that I like. I think that what I'm adverse to is just utility fragrances. I'm not really in the utility space anymore, and every time I smell more fragrances of this type, I realize this fact even more. I do have and appreciate some utility fragrances, but those are not very common in my collection, and they're mostly classical profiles. Stuff like Hypnotizing Fire, which are very common, very generic, very safe type of dry down, are just not my thing. There's tons of fragrances out there. I've bashed many Sergio fragrances because of their very predictable, very boring type of dry down. So I think I'm past that. For a mass appealing utilitarian fragrance to capture my attention, it really has to have something good, something that stands out about it. Either the high quality of ingredients, the high quality of design. There has to be something for me to cling on. Otherwise, it's just another one to throw in the bunch. When it comes to Haltane, I'm surprisingly a lot more positive about this. I do respect the scent profile. It has an identity. It knows what it is, and it's actually quite copied throughout. This and its sister fragrance are very, very popular, and I think that for good reason. They smell like their own thing. They have a very strong identity. Nothing else really smells like these except for, again, the very specific clones. So they have some sort of an appeal. They're very simple in design. They're still meant to be mass appealing and to be wearable on a daily basis. There's no weirdness in there. There's no weird oud. There's no funkiness. There's no edginess. They're just incredibly rounded off, incredibly sanded off. It's an interesting scent profile that is designed to be as likable as possible. And you know what? I kind of can appreciate that. Just to wrap this up, especially given the price for these, I highly suggest you sample these first before buying them, not because they are not mass appealing enough, but because they're almost too mass appealing. If you have any expectations of edginess, any niche expectations, these could definitely fall short. But hey, sample them. They might be exactly what you're looking for. They're definitely not for me. And I do plan on keep going out of my comfort zone, smelling things that are not necessarily under my radar, because all these experiences just add to my fragrance knowledge. They add to my fragrance vocabulary. I'm in this space. I'm here talking to you because I'm first and foremost a huge fan of the language of perfumery. If you like this type of content, if you like my approach to videos, feel free to subscribe. It always helps the channel and it's massively appreciated. If you want to interact with me, leave a comment, suggestion, opinion, or anything else down below. I always reply and I always keep the conversation open. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your time. It's never taken for granted. Many more videos to come as per usual. See you in the next one and cheers.